childhood hero has always been my older brother, Daniel. We lived in a pretty rough area, and like many youth his age, Daniel joined a neighborhood gang by the time he was only 15. And being a younger sister who idolized their older brother, I found myself wanting to hang out with Daniel any chance I could. However, if there were any gang members around, Daniel would yell, "Get out of here!" Naturally upset, I would retreat into my bedroom and cry for hours. Daniel wasn't one for over sentimental statements. I can only assume he didn't want to chip away at the facade of his tough guy image. However, one night, Daniel came into my room and told me that when he yells, "Get out of here," what he's really saying is, "I love you." He said it would be our special little secret. Since 1973, the U.S. has executed a little over 1,500 prisoners on death row. Some people may rejoice this fact. We finally got rid of the absolute menaces of society and they can no longer be around to commit any more crimes. On the other hand, some people may be against the death penalty, thinking we can either rehabilitate them and what if we accidentally kill someone who is actually innocent? Regardless of which side you agree with, many people have never seen a person on death's row awaiting death like some of these prisoners. The Witness by Shannon Cartwright. Anyone who knows anything about being in a gang knows that being in one has its risk. You might as well have a tattoo across your forehead that says, "I'm looking for trouble." Daniel and his friends didn't have tattoos across their foreheads, but trouble found them anyway. At first, it was just petty shoplifting, and then things escalated. Daniel and his friends tried to rob a convenience store. The store owner had a pistol and, according to Daniel, was going to shoot them. Daniel somehow wrestled the gun away from the store owner and, in a panic, shot and killed him. Daniel and his friends were arrested that night, and his trial was set for 3.5 months later. During the trial, just before the guards would take Daniel back to the county prison, Daniel would look at me sitting with our parents and say, "Get out of here." I would look back and mouth the words, "I love you too." Daniel's trial lasted 4.5 days, but it took the jury less than 3 hours to come back with a guilty verdict of first-degree murder. The prosecuting attorney had brought in Daniel's accomplices, who, in exchange for lesser sentences, testified that Daniel's actions were premeditated. They claimed that Daniel had boasted that if anything were to go wrong during the robbery, that he would take care of it. That, combined with the fact that protesters were outside the courthouse demanding stricter penalties against violent crimes. This somehow justified the judge sentencing Daniel to death by lethal injection. Mom and Dad were very bitter. They felt that their lack of financial resources had led to the demise of Daniel through the ineffective court-appointed counsel at his trial. Daniel was sentenced to the state penitentiary, where he was placed in a holding cell on death row. Mom and I would visit Daniel twice a month. On one of these visits, Daniel asked me if I would be willing to witness his execution. He said at any point in time I could change my mind and he would understand, but this was not an option. Daniel had chosen me to be in attendance, and I was going to be there, I told him. Being there to witness his execution would be the last gift I could ever give him. The day of Daniel's execution, Mother, Father, and I drove 3 hours into town, where we stayed at a motel a few blocks away from the prison where his execution would be carried out. We met with Daniel's spiritual advisor, who discussed the scenario, what was going to happen prior to, during, and after Daniel's execution. He asked us several times if we were emotionally prepared to see Daniel die, and our answer was always the same. Yes, we're ready. We drove to the prison, were escorted into the prison chapel. We were told that we were going to be allowed a short, supervised visit with my brother Daniel. My mother went first. When she came back, she was having trouble breathing, and she couldn't speak at all. Dad just wrapped his arms around her, and I wanted to stay there and comfort Mother as well, but It was now my turn to see Daniel. I followed the guard into another room, and there was Daniel sitting on a mattress a few feet away from the bars. There was a line on the floor about 2 feet away from the bars as well. In the back was a guard, and he had the telephone, and over the mic he spoke. He said I could not speak to my brother, and I could not cross the line, and I couldn't touch him. I hesitantly grabbed the phone. He immediately wanted to know how Mom and Dad were holding up. I told him, they're torn up. I then asked him, how's Daniel? He said, he's okay. Daniel wanted to know if I had any plans for the summer. I told him that I had just been cast as the lead role in the community theater production of The Diary of Anne Frank. He jokingly told me to take a look around, that being a prisoner in an attic isn't too far removed from being a prisoner here on death row. Daniel then started talking about faith. He said, it's amazing that Anne Frank never lost her faith through all the adversity she faced. I then asked Daniel if he had lost his faith. He said, no, faith is the one thing I've never lost, not even here on death row. Daniel had a deep sense of God's forgiveness. He had expressed sorrow for all his sins and apologized profusely to the victim's family. My time with Daniel was soon over, and as I was walking away with the guard back to the prison chapel, Daniel walked up to the bars and said, "Get out of here!" I turned back and yelled, "I love you too!" I was brought back to the prison chapel where my parents were, and Dad just hugged me. We were told by the guards that Daniel would be given time to shower and to change into a clean set of clothes. We waited what seemed like an eternity. And then finally, the guards came to escort us out of the building and around a corner into the window where we would witness Daniel's execution. A few witnesses were already present, about 5 newspaper reporters, 4 prison staff members, and Daniel's spiritual advisor. The window blinds were drawn. We sat there for a few minutes until finally they opened the blinds, and Daniel was there on the gurney. He had leather restraints around each ankle and his wrists. He had large leather straps around his chest, his shins, his thighs, and his waist. He had an IV inserted into his left arm, which was hanging off the side. He gave us a brief smile and managed a small wave with his left hand. The warden stood at the head of the gurney. He never looked at anything except the floor. A large microphone came out of the ceiling and positioned itself right next to Daniel's mouth. The warden then told Daniel to proceed with his final comments. It was really amazing to me how the warden never looked at my brother, who was no more than a few inches from him. Daniel turned his face away so he could position his mouth right next to the microphone. It was quiet, both in the viewing room and the injection room. He told Mom and Dad that he loved them both with all his heart. He then told me to buy him a ticket for opening night, because even though the seat might look empty, he would be there, leading the standing ovation. He then told us not to cry for him. He was finally going home. It was hard to tell when the actual injections began. He continued to look at us through the window, then finally he appeared to start coughing, and he started choking, and some of the witnesses gasped. He was gagging, straining against the straps that could find him. And all of a sudden, he convulsed, and he was silent and still. Mom and Dad just sobbed, and I stood there in total silence. I could not believe what I had just witnessed. Finally, which seemed like an eternity, a medical technician entered the room. He felt Daniel's wrist, feeling for a pulse. He then took his stethoscope out and placed it against his chest, listening closely for a heartbeat. He then stood up, leaned toward the microphone, and slowly said, "Death, 10:27 p.m." As we were getting ready to leave, one of the guards informed me and my parents that the reporters wanted to know if the family had a final statement. Mother and father declined, but I walked up to the newspaper reporters, their bright lights shielding their faces and over a dozen microphones in my face. It took every ounce of courage I had. Calmly, I said, "The crime that landed my brother Daniel on death row was not the entirety of his life. My brother was a lot more than that one act. He was thoughtful, caring, kind, and gentle. He was loved as a brother, a friend, and a son, and he will be missed. Tonight, my brother Daniel died with dignity and courage in the face of terror. And tonight, I know this to be true because I was the witness. My brother was my childhood hero. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at hurt." I stopped, looked up at the stars, and said, "Now get out of here."